If you have ever been caught in a discussion about goth music, be it on Twitter, on Reddit, wherever, undoubtedly the concept of goth genres, as in properly placing the music within the proper genre, or subgenres, come up. Some of you understand the importance of goth genres, and then others will just kind of roll their eyes and say, oh, it ain't that deep. Are they important? In short, yes, they are very important. But I'm going to explain why. So, if you've ever been in a situation, again, regarding music, or even anything regarding the subculture, but if you've ever kind of been talking about music and somebody came in and they corrected you, or they explained something to you, so they not only corrected you, but they kind of further explained it and elaborated on it. It doesn't matter how gently that information was delivered, I'm going to guarantee that you did not like it. And the reason is just that idea in general can feel almost like being bullied or even being gatekept. And it's a feeling I know all too well. I remember that feeling, so you are not alone in that. It's not as horrific as we kind of internalize it as. It's all down to just that need of being accepted and having your authenticity feel like it's being called into question. And that's exactly what it is, and that's exactly how I felt. So when I first got involved in the subculture, you know, being a messy ass 15-year-old, thinking I know everything and being corrected like that, I didn't take it well. I didn't like it. I took it in stride on the outside, you know, kind of seethed privately. I did, however, file that information away for later use because I knew it was important. However, just the idea of it was like having my authenticity called into question because I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to be seen as legitimate. I wanted to be seen like I was there for the right reasons. I didn't want anybody to think that I was like one of these Mansonites or these weekenders or these just, you know, these kids that see it as like, oh, I'm gonna get back at my parents and wear black and just run around. I wanted them to know that I was there for the right reasons. And, you know, having somebody correct you like that, it is like somebody it's almost like being called a poser. And whether you're a kid like I was, or you're just new to a group in general, that need to be accepted is just, it's so huge. So I understand why it would feel that way. My ex-boyfriend is somebody that I can really credit with my exposure to the goth subculture and a lot of the music. He is responsible for like that deep dive, like really getting involved, and not just musically, but going to shows and being exposed to other events and meeting all these different people. And he was older than me. He was 4 or 5 years older than me, but now, like at this stage of the game, 4 or 5 years, it's not that big of an age gap. But when you're 17, they have managed to cram an entire lifetime of experiences on top of what I already had. So they were already ahead of the game when I got involved. So you gotta figure, my first glimpse of the scene, I was 14. Now I didn't get involved until I was 15, but I got my first glimpse of the alternative subculture and then kind of by extension the goth scene by way of going to alternative events, one specifically called The Shop or Voodoo Lounge. And that was kind of my first introduction. And it's funny because me and the ex, we used to talk about that place that night. And it was something that he considered a last resort if there was like nothing else to do that night, because it was a place for kids. It was perfect for me because I freaking was a kid. So it was an all ages event. There's a lot of those in the 90s, not so much nowadays. There should be more. So you gotta figure that's when I got involved. It was around 94, 95. So, you know, I got my first real introduction to goth when I was 15 and 95. So for him, having like 4 or 5 years on me, and also being older than me, his first start was more like 88, 89, 90. So he was already doing communion at Limelight. He was going to Bank, Batcave. There was a venue out here called Smashlight. And he had way more than a leg up when it came to that kind of thing. We see like countless shows. He got to see Corpus Delicti, Das Ich, Faith in the Muse, and Rosetta Stone, and another band, it's escaping me right now. They all toured together at once. They all were together, and he got to see that show, which is incredible. And I was just a year behind, and I just missed it, which sucks so bad. But, you know, he had those experiences, so I really looked up to him when it came to things like that, because he introduced me to so much. So he was like the older boyfriend, had the car, and I got to go and do these things and kind of go to these events now. And it opened up a whole different world for me. And he used to make me mixtapes. He always made mixtapes. And his music collection was so freaking extensive. And if you were to look at him in his appearance, sort of asymmetrical, chin length, flat hair, band t-shirt, usually was an industrial band t-shirt, and army shorts, military shorts, and combat boots that came up to the knees, versus the mixtapes that he made me. If you were to look at that with your 2022 eyes, you would probably be very confused. But for the 90s, he was very much on brand. So on some days, he would look like that, and then, which was 90% of the time, but then other times, he would just show up with his hair suddenly teased up, and then you realize that asymmetrical haircut, he had the Koviak, which you wouldn't know because it was kind of flattened. And then he would pale face makeup, he'd have the Cleopatra eyes, the black lipstick, he would be wearing rosaries and chains and all kinds of different things, and fishnets, and it was just a stark contrast. But that kind of fluidity was something that was so indicative of the time, because everything was very fluid. It's not like nowadays, where he may actually be viewed as inauthentic, because the way that you look is kind of an extension to the music that you listen to, and you choose this one look and you're married to it, and you kind of express that constantly. And should you deviate in any way, for example, you're dressing down 90% of the time and then you're up the other, that would be seen as inauthentic, possibly even a poser by today's standards. But again, that kind of fluidity was more indicative of the 90s. There wasn't so much of emphasis on that kind of thing. So if I said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. Back then, if something was called goth, that's because it was. And nowadays, that could pretty much be anything. Today, we are very militant with the genres, but back then we didn't have to be, because there was nothing out there that could actively pollute it or confuse people. Everything was done in person, or in other occasions you can order your music, for example, by mail, but everything you did in person. If you wanted it, you had to go outside and you had to get it. No online. There was no internet. You had to walk out your door and you had to freaking go get it yourself. So the X's mixtapes, he introduced me to a little bit more of a, he loved a lot of shoegaze stuff. He was really into shoegaze and ethereal. I always had been anyway, because I kind of like that more romantic approach to things, and my love of ethereal was only heightened when it came to a lot of the things he made me, because, you know, the mixtapes that he made me, he introduced me to things like Black Tape, he introduced me to Lycia, he introduced me to Love Is Colder Than Death, Diary of Dreams. I remember one of the mixtapes had Diary of Dreams on it. And it's funny because if I listen to certain songs that were on the mixtapes that he made me, I will automatically think of another one, because my brain kind of remembers the mixtape and it remembers what came before and after it. So every now and again I'll do that, and it's interesting how the memory works that way sometimes. Oh, Cocteau Twins. Cocteau Twins he also introduced me to, and I remember it was the song Wax and Wane. And when I first heard it, I didn't take to them too well, because as a teenager you're still acclimating to music that is different, and that was just a little bit too weird at the time. I eventually got into them, but that being said, you know, him making mixtapes with things like Sunshine Blind, Diary of Dreams, Lycia, Love Is Colder Than Death, he even put things like More Syphilitica on it. You would find him out on the dance floor dancing to things like Skinny Puppy, Frontline Assembly, pretty much anything off of Wax Trax' label. You would see him dancing to Yell Work, you would see him dancing to Das Ich, you would see him dancing to Laibach, Nights Are Ebb, and all of the industrial music as well. So much of this had to do with the mass quantities of just crossover that we had back then between industrial and goth. And this happened because there was a lot of venue sharing, and it was also because a lot of our music was just very cohesive, because 90s industrial and modern day industrial are night and day. You could not compare the two. They're very, very different. So goth and industrial under the same roof sharing a dance floor was not so far-fetched of a thing, because we knew back then, goth and industrial, we knew it was not the same thing. We knew it was two entirely separate subcultures, different music. We knew this. Back then, it was such common knowledge that industrial and goth were two entirely different things, but nowadays you need a fucking Venn diagram to explain it to people. So bear with me here. I'm going to approach this from two sides. Why it is important to kind of enforce the concept of goth genres and subgenres, and why some of the messengers of this information do more harm than good. The guidance is meant to come from a place of passion, ensuring the perseverance of the subculture, just kind of maintaining that authenticity. Wanting to guide new blood onto the correct path because we want them to create those experiences, those memories in the way that we have, and we carry them to this day and we cherish. Want that for you. So I'm always there. I'm always lurking and kind of like, you know, hesitant to get involved in conversations, but I like to be the wallflower. I like to see what's going on, and sometimes I just kind of pop in, see what's going on, and pop out because sometimes I don't have the time to really engage and get involved in a lot of conversations. But, you know, recently I've come across some messengers. They're less guided by love of the scene and more guided by arrogance and a few other questionable motives, but we'll get to that, I think. Maybe. Firstly, why are genres? Why are goth genres and why are subgenres so damn important? Well, okay, for a start, goth being a music-based subculture, it's probably important to know what music is goth and what music is not. So when other genres are falsely categorized as goth, it just dumps buckets of chum into the clear blue sea that is goth, and then in come these swarms of sharks that chomp away at the chum and leave a mess. And that once clear blue sea that was goth becomes so mucked up with garbage that you can barely make out the blue amongst the mess. The knock-on effects of that is that it buries all things goth. Events like clubs, like shows, concerts, bands that are coming around, they're touring, new releases from either our much long beloved or new bands that takes all those new things and it just buries it beneath the rubble. And what ends up happening is that clubs and shows, far less attended. New releases, no one notices them. Nobody buys them, nobody supports the bands because no one can find them. Advertise all you want, but when you are up against trending hashtags and mainstream engagement, hacking all things that don't belong into the subculture, into goth, because they like the brand of edgy the word goth brings along with it, our stuff just becomes kind of dwarfed by comparison. Because as commonly used a term, and somewhat a household term that goth may be, it's surprisingly difficult for people to fathom that we're just an underground scene. It's an underground subculture, and it always has been, and it really always will be. Because as things like social media, they grow, and more people come along and they muddy those waters. More proactive, by extension, people like us are going to become when it comes to things like enforcing, for lack of a better way to put it, genre policing. And it's not to be jerks, but it's to keep things clear. Kind of like using your windshield wipers when it's raining. You use them so you can see where you're going. You don't turn them on and you go 2 feet and you end up in a ditch. Same thing. People get really passionate talking about the relevance of goth and goth genres and things like that. It's because misinformation really does hurt the scene. These are things that are necessary because we don't want goth to die, especially by outside entitlement or ignorance. Do you know what else the scene needs to stay alive? Other people. So the whole act of gatekeeping is to keep people out of something, keep people away from something. And with that mentality, just, you know, you flip the hourglass and you watch the sand go down and watch the scene dry up and die. And that's not what we want. That's not what anybody wants. So what many may presume is like a gate slamming in their face is actually somebody handing you the keys. The reason that you're even in that position in the first place is because you got the name of the thing right. You just got the wrong address. Somebody simply taking you and just kind of aiming you in the right direction. That's it. Everything we do is to keep goth thriving. Keep you out is the kiss of death, but to educate you is to open the metaphorical gates. When I was referring to these messengers doing more harm than good, I have a few people in mind, specifically a few people in mind, and when I have their activity and their posts kind of forced upon me and in my face, it makes me just want to... They approach the whole concept of educating and guiding in a way that is just far more arrogant. Like it looks like it's fueled by arrogance. It's not coming from a place of perseverance. It's more of an opportunity to pull rank or to lord authority, an excuse to name drop the most obscure bands that have ever come into existence. And believe me, that is a trick that I know and used to be pulled in the 90s all the damn time. People even used to invent band names just so nobody else could find them. You could never do that now because we have the internet. However, it was a commonly used tact. Stupid. They are straight up pedantic to the point of overkill. But genres are important. Genres are necessary. But these people scare the ever-loving shit out of new goths by taking just regular-ass goth shit, regular goth stuff, and then turning it into this complex scientific formula delivered by a pedantic, unhinged Catholic school nun from 1812 who screams in your face and whips you on the knuckles with a ruler and likes it. Those on the receiving end, they don't realize that the subculture itself, it's only like this on the internet. It's not like that in the real world. It's not like that once you go outside and go to an event. If they end up at a club or a show, no one would dare treat them that way. But they don't know that. What do they have to go on? This, online, the internet, it's their first exposure to the subculture, so they don't know otherwise. For all they know is that if somebody came at them like this online, imagine how much worse it would be in person. They wouldn't dare put themselves in that position in the first place. So they abandon the concept entirely. They abandon goth. People who know nothing about music, nothing about the subculture, who will just take any genre of music and then just lump it in with goth, are doing the exact same thing as these people who police with their egos up their ass, because in the end, they're achieving the exact same thing. They're getting the same outcome. They hurt goth. So going on that, I've done one of these before, but I want to do one again. I think it's a little bit long overdue, and I want to do a little bit of an elaboration on it. I want to do a video about all of the different subgenres of goth music, all of the subgenres, and I think I'm going to add for good measure adjacent music that does have its place in the subculture, because it gets club play, however, it is not goth. Because I think hearing something like that will also help you identify goth music even better. There's a lot of bands, and there's also a lot of songs specifically that are in no way goth. However, they have their place within the subculture because they have been sort of like ushered in amongst goths. It's like part of us. It's like, okay, you're one of us. You're like the cool raver friend that we take with us. But one of those things would be Concrete Blonde, Bloodletting. You would probably hear that at many, many goth nights. It's not a goth song. They're not a goth band, but they're adjacent in ways that a lot of people will kind of accept that kind of thing. I'm going to do everything under the umbrella of goth, all the different subgenres, and then I'm going to add adjacent. Yes, genres are important. You have to bear with me. I come from a time where goth and gothic were used interchangeably, which is a major no-no today. So I'm trying.